bachelors, so pick the window you want and see what happens. We have Brent crude oil essentially trading today back to where we more or less started the week, a few pennies above $75 a barrel. So a lot of noise, a lot of drama, and back to where we started. Let's kick off with Arne Lohman Rasmussen, Chief Analyst and Head of Research at Global Risk Management. Arne, your thoughts after yet another bombastic week of fairly significant Trump headlines, and the oil markets are ending where they started. A lot of noise and not a lot of impact on the oil markets. Your thoughts of putting those two things together?
Yeah, good morning, Sean, and good morning, colleagues. I actually thought that the new rhetoric towards Russia from the US, I don't know if it's new rhetoric, would have a larger impact, a more bearish impact, because it seems like the US is actually open for a very quick deal with Russia, give a lot of concessions, and after that, of course, giving up sanctions on Russia. We did see some drawback yesterday. It seems like maybe they sharpened the rhetoric a bit again. JD Vance, for example, yesterday. But definitely the whole case about especially Russian sanctions weighing on supply may be a bit weaker after this week. On the other hand side, actually a bit of a bullish report from the International Energy Agency yesterday, actually upping the demand forecast, seeing a less of a deficit in the market. They actually put focus on the sanctions, saying they will have a material impact. I'm really looking forward to hear what Daniel has to say about the maximum pressure strategy on Iran. That will be the key focus area, I think, for the market the next couple of months. And then it seems like all this talk about tariffs has been put a bit aside and say, okay, it will come in the future, but in my view, it will come back with a vengeance. So I've become less bullish on oil prices. I was actually a few weeks ago saying that in Q2 and Q3 we could go well above $80. I'm not so sure anymore.
Arne, just a quick follow-up on that. The early sort of signals coming out of the Trump Putin phone call and plans for a meeting in Saudi Arabia essentially excluded Europe and the principal player of Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. Europe being left on the sidelines of a negotiated settlement with Russia, is that something to be concerned about from a European point of view, or your thoughts on that as one of the sort of signature takeaways this week?
I think it's a big concern seen from a Ukrainian perspective. That's where we should look at this. When you start giving concession to the part attacking Ukraine day one, then it's a big concern. I think there has been a lot of fight back from EU the last 2 days, saying that they will not accept to be left out of this. And as I said, it seems like the Trump administration did realize maybe they got a bit too far on this idea that the US and Russia could just take care of it. So maybe it's a bit more balanced now, but yes, there's a big concern in Europe, in the EU, that the EU will be left out of this, so that we will be left with a bill to reconstruct, to provide the safety, and the US can set the deal.
You wonder at this stage whether Europe and whatever the collective EU are thinking, is Trump a bigger threat to Europe than Putin? I mean, I think that is now a question. Is America a bigger threat to Europe than Russia? Daniel Rahmat, Senior Energy Security Consultant at sitting in Tehran. Daniel, your thoughts, just picking up on the Arn's question, where the rubber meets the road in all of the Trump noise. Where is the rubber meeting the road likely yet from the Iranian oil exports point of view? We've had the announcement, the executive order, whatever it's called, that the new government in Washington will reimpose the maximum pressure, which last time round curtailed and reduced Iranian oil exports to close to about 1 million barrels below where they are today, 1 million barrels a day below where they are today in terms of exports. Your thoughts on where that's going and how real and tangible it will become?
Hello, everybody, and happy Valentine's Day. And it's a pleasure again to be here, Sean. Yes, Donald Trump has, as we thought, started very hawkish against Iran. And despite sending some messages that I'm going to call them, I'm going to be in touch with them, negotiations will be starting. It's very obvious that his approach towards Iran is hawkish. He tries to put actually the maximum pressure again on Iran to reduce Iran's oil exports, to control Iran's actually financial capabilities for several reasons. The first one is to reach a sort of any kind of balance, I don't call it a deal, balance with Iran, under which Iran has significantly lower capacity to implement its hard power around the Middle Eastern region. At the same time, I don't call Donald Trump a businessman. I call him a seller. I think he's planning to make a package of Iran, to sell it to someone for a price, whatever it can be. And the clients and the customers would be somehow significant if we get precise into the Iran's regional rivals. So I believe that he's going to implement his maximum pressure again. Everything very much depends on China, whether they're going to what extent they're going to be actually supporting Iran or not supporting Iran. At the time, Shandong has ordered has banned the entrance of the sanctioned tankers to enter its ports. So that would be a very significant decline in the capacity of Iran for selling oil to Shandong. 95% of Iranian oil goes to Shandong in China. And at the same time, the infrastructure in Shandong are very good targets for American sanctions. And the volume of Iranian...
Have we seen China signal that they might back away from Iran? Sort of early signs that they might get, even with the Biden sanctions, if you like, on the dark fleet and so on, that they might be a little bit more wary. They might buckle under this increasing sort of U.S. pressure.
During the last 2-3 months of Biden administration, there were new sanctions imposed on Iran, which I think they were the beginning of the new sanctions of Donald Trump. I cannot very clearly separate these two kind of sanctions from each other, but I think China has its own concerns whether they're going to be able to tolerate the volume of the impact of sanctions on China or not. At the same time, Donald Trump has banned Iran's gas exports to Iraq, which is a huge amount of money coming to Iran from. 140,000 barrels of fuel oil was sold by Iraq, and the money was transferred to Iran to pay back the Iranian gas and electricity exports to Iraq, which is very significant amount of money for Iran. And also that would very much threaten energy security in Iraq as well. So now at the moment, Donald Trump is entering with shocks, and he's going to surprise everybody with more and more news regarding sanctions, shocks, hits to Iran, hits to here, hits to there. But I think he just wants to make a sort of chaotic system in which he can reach a new kind of balance. The reason that Iran is not proceeding with its previous demand for having sanctions with Donald Trump is, at the moment, I think Iranians are considering a sort of balance instead of a sort of deal with Donald Trump. And that would happen within 6 months to 12 months. By that time, I think the volume of
the balance that is not a deal. It's it's kind of ultimately the question is, will maximum pressure be impactful as it was last time? Let's come back to that. Alan Gelder, SVP Refining, Chemicals and Oil Markets at Wood Mackenzie, back in the simple world of just drilling the stuff out of the ground and turning it into useful products. Where are we at the moment, would you say, generally, Alan, from a sort of fundamentals point of view, supply demand? We're a few weeks away from OPEC Plus planning on increasing supply. Behind all the noise, are these markets balanced? I mean, $75 a barrel seems to, pretty much happy space, Goldilocks for everybody.
Sean, we think they broadly are, but there's a tendency to oversupply. So we look at our demand forecast for this year, and it's about 1.2 million barrels a day. Everyone's coming a bit closer. We haven't got the wide disparities that we had sort of last year, and we've been floating around that level for a while. The challenge is non-OPEC supply growth this year is going to outpace that, but later in the year. So the view that we've got is actually OPEC bows to a little bit of the pressure from Mr. Trump, and we see the plan to release barrels in April, that kicking in, but actually it gets in. OPEC the market gets into a difficult place towards the end of the year when those non-OPEC supply from largely conventional projects come on. We don't believe drill will work because we're at a low 70s type price. That we're not going to see a huge growth in US tight oil. There's lots of risks around the projects that are coming on because they tend to be in Latin America, so it could be slow. But our tendency is there's a bit more oil supply than there is oil demand. So the key challenge is actually how impactful is what's happening with maximum pressure with Iran. We're seeing sanctioned vessels still move into Shandong because we're tracking the vessels, but there's an awful lot of vessels sitting off Vladivostok that are loaded with ESPO that haven't got anywhere to go. So more ship-to-ship activity. So how much oil is held off the market through these sanctioning activities and countries reassessing the relationships they've had? So a critical one, as Daniel mentioned, is what happens between China and Iran. How much volume is lost? Will the US go after Venezuela? And one of your headlines was talking about Turkey not taking Russian crude. So does that stop? To what degree does Russian exports come down?
Arne, it does seem that with all of these things coexisting, the big drama of taking over Greenland seems like 5 years ago, and we're on to the next sort of shiny object. But ultimately, the question of looking at fundamentals, Arne, such as very cold weather in Europe, very, very high natural gas prices. Is there an option to switch? Does the liquids do well in this situation? Could we see any other sort of demand support for crude oil, with the likes of the high price of gas and other, whether it be China surprising on the upside from a demand point of view? Where the demand surprises maybe could come from?
Sean, that we're pretty big in the maritime sector, in the shipping industry. And there, for example, we see that the dual fuel ships, the LNG powered ships, they are basically switching to MGO or VLSFO, especially if they can do the last thing, because that is cheaper than LNG. Today is, of course, a relatively modest market, but just underlines that there are switching going on at the moment. It's definitely cheaper to use, not definitely, but it is cheaper to use fuel oil than natural gas also in power production. It's not very widely used in Europe, but it may be more used in other countries. Do remember that gas prices outside North Europe North America is a global price through the LNG link. It's the same, basically the same price in Europe than in Asia due to the LNG link. So I think there is some switching going on now. I think the International Energy Agency also mentioned that yesterday, that you're switching to fuel oil in power production. You see these dual fuel ships shifting away from LNG. So it does have an impact on the oil market, that the gas prices are high, especially outside North America. So yes, it does have an impact. We also see, I think, some pocket of strength. We've been talking about this before. Again, this fuel oil market is actually very, very strong. In Singapore, I don't know about today, but a few days ago, high sulfur fuel oil, 3.5%, a fuel oil, a residual oil, was trading above Brent. That is certainly not normal. That is a residual oil. It's a leftover. It should be trading with a discount. It doesn't, and it is a illustration.
What does that tell you? What is that? That's a very unusual moment.
It tells me two things. First of all, that the demand is still there from power and the shipping industry. There's actually quite a big demand for fuel oil. But of course, it mostly tells me that there's something going on the supply side, which is that there's basically a lack of heavy sour crude oil in the market for the refineries. The Russian oil is heavy sour crude oil. The Iranian oil is in that ball game. The Canadian oil is in that ball game. So there's a growing fear that there will be a lack of heavy sour crude oil in the market. It may be mainly a fear, because if we look at, like, for example, like the so-called physical premiums, what is you actually paying if you want to go out tomorrow and buy fuel oil? This premium is not that high. It is mostly in the paper market we are seeing this, but there's definitely a concern about lack of heavy sour crude oil in the market. The OPEC restrictions are also having an impact there. The Russian sanctions is having an impact there. So yes, that is a clear sign that the sanctions do have an impact also today.
Daniel, just coming back to the sort of thesis there, that what can support Iran maintaining its oil export levels, which are generally recognized at little under 2 million barrels a day of oil exports that are coming out of Iran. So partners, you mentioned obviously China, which is the big customer for most of that oil. But what about geopolitical partners who might sort of counter the US maximum pressure, like Russia, which is a country that Iran has been close to, but also now increasingly Riyadh and Saudi Arabia's partnership, or alliance, rapprochement, however you want to call it, with Iran. What are your thoughts about those actors supporting or sort of restricting the full pressure onto Iran that would essentially bring the economic equation in Iran to unbearable levels?
Regarding Russians and Saudis, we need to very much be aware that actually exposing yourself to the US sanctions really depends on how committed the Donald Trump administration is to impose the sanctions on Iran and the ones who are violating those sanctions. If those sanctions are very serious, nobody will be happy to get actually exposed towards such sanctions and tolerate the consequences. At the same time,
just clarify that. I didn't quite understand that. Getting exposed to sanctions. You mean Russia would be exposed? Who's exposed to which sanctions?
If whoever, Chinese, Russians, Saudis, whoever wants to support, even the UAE, if they want to help Iran to evade such sanctions, they would be under the risk of being sanctioned by Americans again.
Okay, I see.
This very much depends first on how much Donald Trump is committed to impose those sanctions, which I believe that he is very committed to actually implement the sanctions again. And
typically he targets anybody weak. The weaker you are, the more likely sanctions or trade tariffs are coming your way.
Absolutely right. And the second important point is why you should support somebody who is being sanctioned. Well, the first thing is maybe a sort of geopolitical alliance would make you would encourage you to support somebody under sanctions, for example, political or geopolitical. Correct?
I mean, the last time we had maximum pressure, there was quite a bit of turbulence in this neighborhood. I mean, we saw the very substantial. I mean, the most extreme was the attack on the Abqaiq Saudi oil facilities, which, whether they were connected or not, they happened at the same time, and other incidents. Are they the risks we face if this happens again, do you think?
I at the moment I don't see anything which is proving a sort of such a big risk of again such actually conflicts in the region, especially between Iran and the Saudi Arabia. But look, Sean, if somebody is at the corner, I'm speaking about Iran. If Iran feels it's getting to the brink of a fall or something like that, or huge bankruptcy, that would try to change the game, would try to actually make a big shift in the regional policies. The peace in this region that the Iran and Saudi rapprochement is brokered by China, and Iran's reason for accepting that peace was China is the sole Iranian oil importer. If there is no oil exports, there would be no reason for peace in the region. I'm not going to.
Well, it's interesting how all of these things are connected, and I my sense is that there's a lot of actors that maybe previously might have had other ideas, but now wouldn't necessarily be supportive of a full squeeze on Iran. Alan, let's look a little bit at refining. We just had the Indian Prime Minister in I think he's still in America, a big sort of love-in with Trump and Modi, but at the sort of core of it was a lot of talk about energy and oil and gas trade positioning there. Your thoughts on the outlook for India and its ability to take more of this discounted Russian oil or not? It's what it can do with America and its own ability to be a center of demand growth.
We've got India is becoming as a key country for future demand growth, because we've got transport fuel demand peaking in China. We suspect the Indians will continue to take discounted Russian oil. If we're tracking the ships, there's lots of things that are currently undeclared, but they're expecting them to head to India. The challenge for, say, India is they've got a refining system that is very well aligned with medium sour crudes, things that come out of the Middle East, and that's not what the US exports. So it's going to be more of a gas-based story, or in a sense, ideally, one of the things that India would be very keen on is increasing their upstream production and US technology and ventures there, perhaps.
And what about looking at the growth that India has had in recent times, recent years, as a sort of a major refining center for exports of products across the region and further afield? I mean, across the east of Suez region, but further afield. And now China seems to be, its growth architecture in terms of GDP is coming off. Is that likely to put more refined products out of India into the market? Or where's the refining margins in Asia at the moment?
They're not particularly good at the moment, Sean. Globally, they're sort of bouncing around the floor. So we're not really expecting them to pick up particularly, because they need to ship distillate barrels into Europe. There's gasoline flows into the Middle East, but we've got a refining system where we've got plenty of supply, and we're reliant on demand growth. So Asian margins broadly staying flat at levels they were at the end of last year. Not particularly exciting. Back to pre-pandemic levels.
Let's go to the survey question, which is looking a little bit at the situation on where Brent is. We've had Brent oil prices average close to $75 in the first half of the Q1. We're basically smack in the center of Q1 now, this Valentine's Day. Will it be higher or lower in the second half of Q1? So we've had our first 6 weeks of the year, and we did pop above 80 at in the early part of January, on the back of what Trump might do and could do and so forth. And then since Trump has arrived, the noise has been deafening, but the actual impact on the markets has been somewhat minimal, and on the energy markets and the equity markets have continued to break records, it would appear, every day. So the second half of this quarter is looking exactly either higher or lower than 75. Welcome the ideas on that. Arne, another part, I mean, we've talked about whether Iran will keep its 2 million or not quite 2 million barrels a day of oil exports flowing over the coming weeks and months with the full maximum pressure. The other question I just wanted to dig a little bit deeper into is, where is Chinese demand at? Where we've sort of started the year with a general consensus of bearish sentiment about expectations of Iran, or of China rather, China demand, and obviously facing a potential trade war, but certainly a tariff restrictions now the U.S. have imposed so far, and it could be more, but 10% on Chinese goods into the U.S. Generally, where is the expectation about right on China, i.e. fairly sedate, or what are your thoughts of where China could go this year?
No, I think the market is correct, having a very sort of kind of bearish outlook for Chinese demand growth. It will not be strong. Sanction tariffs, a manufacturing cycle being weak is sort of one side of it, and another side of it is, of course, that the transition is actually ongoing at a rapid pace in China. A lot of electric vehicles, LNG powered trucks, and so on. It actually matters, but I think
and a lot of coal. I mean, they seem to be.
That's another thing.
I mean, at the same time, I mean, the power generation for EVs is not coming from from the sun.
No, it's not. It's coming from coal. It's not coming from fuel oil powered.
Right.
So the impact will still be the same. But yes, I agree with you. There's a lot of fuss about the green transition in China, and we have to look into where is the electricity coming from. But that's another story. But I think the outlook is for a relatively modest growth in Chinese demand. And I think, as Alan said, I think India is the key region to focus on here. Middle East itself is another key region to focus on in respect of demand growth. And then finally, the US is actually still doing quite well in growth-wise. Let's see how the tariffs will impact. But to start, we'll probably have a boost, and then the sort of the hangovers will come later in the year. But I think we have to have a relatively there's an outlook for relatively modest demand growth in China, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. If anything, I think there's a risk that this could actually surprise at the downside. It turns out that the Chinese economy is weaker than we actually expect. Do remember, we have been talking about adding fuel to the economy for the last 2 years, monetary, fiscal stimuli. It doesn't really seem to kickstart the economy.
Alan, last word for you. We've seen, probably, I mean, from our own sort of narrow tunnel vision from the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that one of the biggest impacts of that in recent years has been the change in energy flows, right? Russian crude going back to India for the first time, Gulf products coming out of the Gulf, going into Europe, Russian products going into Africa, lots of different new energy flows. As we start to get close to the end game of this particular era, Whatever happens, whoever's sitting at the table, one has to assume there's going to be some kind of deal sooner rather than later around Russia. How could energy flows be impacted, do you think? How do you think that do things go back? Is everything bedded in now? Just a sort of headline view on where you think energy flows go in the assumption that a deal is done with Russia.
Very much they would snap back, but it depends snap back to where. Because what we've got is energy flows that are incredibly inefficient. Sending Russian crude out of the Baltics to India doesn't make sense because you've got medium sour crudes going the other way. So a lot depends upon whether Europe remains with that sanctions. But what you would see is if sanctions are eased and the US was able to take Russian crude, you'd see a lot of crude move across the Atlantic because the trade flows at the moment are incredibly inefficient. So if there's markets that open up, those Russian diesel only goes to Brazil because the Europeans aren't taking it. And so you look at all of that. So trade would become much more efficient if, depending upon who eases sanctions. But the current situation is very inefficient because normally oil of similar quality and oil products don't really cross each other. That's not how really the market works. So, but that's what we've got now.
Yeah, it seems to me that that's the next sort of big North Star in a way. Brent oil prices lower in the second half of the Q1, according to everybody in this room. We'll post that on social and see where it goes. It's certainly been a lot of noisy background, but not necessarily too much impact on the oil markets, who are still sort of holding up, it has to be said, despite everything, and with 6 million barrels of supply off the market from OPEC Plus. That'll certainly be another big story in the second half of Q1 as we hear from OPEC Plus on their plans to whether go ahead with their increases on April 1st or not. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us this morning on this nice Valentine's morning for everybody. Arne Lommen Rasmussen in the free Greenland, welcome and have a great weekend. Alan Gelder, best of luck to you. I'm sure that Donald Trump, you never know, he may want to take over Scotland again. His mother's territory.
May solve the independence question.
or maybe just Skye Island. Is it the Isle of Skye she was from? Daniel Rahmat, as always, thank you so much. Really critical voice contributing to these conversations. Have a great weekend, everyone. Take care.